Hey readers, as 2024 comes to a close, I wanted to take a look back on my year of reading and talk about some of my favorite reads out of the 80 plus books I read this year. I do keep a really simple reading journal as a way to record my thoughts upon finishing a book and keep track of my reads. I will write about what I liked, maybe what I didn't like, reflections on the content of the story, if I connected to the characters in any specific way, just that sort of thing. And as a girl who loves quotes, I'm able to jot down some of my favorites. Anyway, I'm mentioning this because I was flipping through my reads this year and found it interesting that some books that I may not have initially rated 5 stars ended up being books that I just couldn't shake. And similarly, some books that I rated really highly may not have stayed with me as long as I expected them to. I definitely gravitate towards fiction, fantasy, and historical fiction, and I do think that those preferences are reflected in the titles that I'll be talking about today. So without further ado, let's get into it. First and foremost, The Women by Kristin Hannah. I love Kristin Hannah's writing. The Great Alone and The Nightingale are 2 5-star reads that I think about frequently, but honestly, I think The Women is Hannah's greatest novel yet. In this book, we follow Frankie, a young nursing student who wants to make her family and her country proud through her service, so she enlists as an army nurse in the Vietnam War. But when she arrives in Vietnam, she's overwhelmed by the reality and devastation of the conflict. As you can probably imagine, the job ends up being emotionally and physically challenging, and Frankie experiences long hours, terrifying scares, and plenty of losses. Half of this story takes place in Vietnam throughout Frankie's term, but the other half takes place back stateside when she returns to an America that is very different than the one she left behind. Veterans are being treated horribly upon their return, and many Americans refuse to even acknowledge women's involvement in the war, let alone offer any support to those who may need it. Frankie then has to figure out how to deal with the trauma she's left with and all of the loss she's experienced. She is tackling PTSD, addiction, depression, and relationship issues, and I just wanted to give her the biggest hug. I do think that Frankie's perspective on the war and the life that followed was incredibly powerful. I felt like I was right there with her, wearing her shoes. Even though I don't have any experiences that compare to Frankie's, I felt every emotion alongside her, and I feel like that's what reading is all about. You'll probably be able to tell from this list of favorites, but I love an emotional book, and this is perhaps the most emotional book I've read. Like, seriously, it made me cry so hard that I felt physically ill, and that has never happened to me before. And it's because Frankie may be a fictional character, but she's inspired by so many real women, and the Vietnam War and its devastation is real. And the issues that Frankie's character struggles with are things that people all over the world are also facing in their own lives. Overall, I think this book was executed to perfection. I love that it shines a light on the heroes of the Vietnam War that may not have initially gotten the recognition they deserved. And I think if you love historical fiction, or even if you're just starting to get into the genre, this is a must-read. I actually picked this next one up because I saw that Kristin Hannah rated it 5 stars, which did set my expectations quite high, but it definitely measured up. It's Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. I know this book was really popular last year, and Apple TV even released a mini-series based off of it, but for some reason I was just hesitant to pick it up. And once I started reading, I couldn't help but kick myself for putting it off for so long. The book takes place in the 60s, and our main character, Elizabeth Zott, is a female scientist whose experience in the field is quite different than her male colleagues. She isn't treated like the professional she is, never being taken seriously and sometimes even being mistreated or taken advantage of. Though once she meets famous scientist Calvin Evans, who sees her for the brilliant woman she is, everything changes. Calvin and Elizabeth fall madly in love, but she unexpectedly loses him in a freak accident. Another surprise leaves Elizabeth facing a fate she never expected. She's having a baby, and now she has to take on parenthood all on her own. Her pregnancy causes her to lose her position at the Research Institute, but a very unique opportunity soon presents itself. an evening television show where she will share cooking recipes with housewives while also encouraging the women to reject societal expectations and be whoever they aspire to be. The show is certainly popular, it's challenging the status quo and leaving women feeling empowered, but as you can imagine, it's also causing quite a stir with many considering the message to be inappropriate. I think Elizabeth was such a strong character who was certainly ahead of her time. Even reading this book as a woman in 2024 left me feeling inspired by Elizabeth and so grateful for how far we've come. I will say you're not reading this book for the science, you're reading this book for the characters and the messaging regarding change, gender inequality, and social norms. Finally, I just wanted to add that I'm not really sure why this book is marketed as a purely comedic read, because I do think that's a bit misleading. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of hilarious moments in this book, but I hope my little synopsis made it clear that this story is touching upon some pretty serious topics as well, and I'm certainly not complaining because that emotion is why I'm including this book in my top reads of the year. I just wanted to make that very clear. Next is The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak, and this is one of those books that I didn't initially rate 5 stars, but as I reflect on my year of reading, it is surely a standout. And I think there are a few reasons for that, one of them being the beautiful writing with the unique perspective of a fig tree. And also, I was unfamiliar with the cypress problem before reading this book, and it's something that I've thought a lot about since. The story has an alternating timeline, with part of it taking place in a relatively modern-day London where Ada and her father live following the death of her mother, and we're also taken back to Cyprus in the 70s to early 2000s, where Ada's parents met and fell in love in a land divided by conflict. At this time in Cyprus, there was a lot of hate and violence between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. And Ada's father, Kostas, was a Greek Christian, and her mother, Daphne, a Turkish Muslim. This means that they had this sort of Romeo and Juliet type romance where they had to sneak around in order to be together. But they found this safe space to meet in a local tavern that just so happens to have a fig tree growing in the middle of the restaurant. As I mentioned, we do get the fig tree's perspective throughout the book. A lot of the novel is narrated in third person, and then that alternates with the fig tree, who is able to share what it witnessed in Cyprus throughout that time, from Ada's parents' secret love story to all the violence that occurred as a result of the island's segregation. As Ada learns more about her family's history, she's able to better understand her parents and all they experienced before her, like growing up in a war-torn land, emigrating and hoping for a better future, and even how that trauma impacted the rest of their lives. I just think this book is really imaginative with stunning writing, and I love the connection to nature and how it touches upon how war doesn't only affect people, but it affects the ecosystem as well. And it exposed me to an ongoing conflict that I was unfamiliar with. And yeah, I just had to include it on this list because it really ended up being an unexpected favorite. So then we have A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman, and one thing about me is I am a Fredrik Backman superfan. I just personally love his writing and his way of balancing humor with his insanely relatable observations of human nature. In this book, we are unsurprisingly following Ove, a recent widower who is struggling to see the point of life without his wife, and he's also recently retired, which is definitely contributing to that feeling of being lost. When he's reached the point of hopelessness, some new neighbors move in and work their way into grumpy Uva's life, and his everyday is about to get a lot more exciting as he reluctantly forms a friendship with them. This book also has an alternating timeline, which allows you as the reader to better understand Uve and his relationship with his late wife, and the flashbacks act sort of as an explanation for why Uve is feeling the way that he is. I really enjoyed Uve's character because yes, sometimes he can come across as a huge grouch, but his actions tell a different story and he softens up as the story progresses and he begins to embrace his community. Watching a man find joy and purpose in his life when he thought it was lost for good was just really heartwarming, and I would recommend this book and honestly any of Backman's novels to anyone who loves an honest and moving read. So next we have the book that I seemingly cannot shut up about, and that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. 2024 is the year I finally dove into the Cosmere, and I cannot wait to continue that journey in the new year. This is a trilogy about a rebellious group who is looking to overthrow an unfair government run by the Lord Ruler, who's this sort of immortal god and tyrant oppressing the common people, or the Ska. It has this really cool original magic system called Allomancy, where those characters with allomantic powers are able to burn different metals in order to activate their magical abilities. Kelsier, the charismatic leader of the rebellion, is actually a Mistborn, which means he has the ability to utilize all of the allomantic powers when most allomancers only have one, and he recruits all of the best allomancers that he knows to his team for this ultimate heist against the Lord Ruler. Kelsier also recruits Vin, who is a teenage street urchin with more power than she realizes, and she may be the key to success in overthrowing the Lord Ruler if she can learn to trust Kelsier and his crew. Kelsier introducing Vin to the world of Allomancy allows for complex world building that is easy to grasp. I was always engaged in the story. It never felt like Sanderson was info dumping, which I think is really impressive for an epic fantasy with a completely unique magic system and an ensemble of characters. Overall, I was just really impressed with this book and the trilogy as a whole. I do think that this first one ended up being my favorite, but I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. They're captivating, thought-provoking, fun, and emotional, and that's really everything that I want in a story. And I just have to add that the Sanderlanche phenomenon is real. So next we have Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Legendborn and Bloodmarked are the first two books in a trilogy inspired by Arthurian legend, and the third and final book will be published in March 2025, and I'm very excited for it. Honestly, I think that's why I'm including these books in this video, because they're not quite 5-star reads for me, but I can't wait to see how the story ends. It's a true YA fantasy where we follow a 16-year-old girl named Bree who is enrolled in this early college opportunity at UNC Chapel Hill, and she's hoping this change will allow her to cope with the grief over losing her mother. But when Bree arrives on campus, she begins to notice a presence of magic, a magic she's able to connect to the night of the accident when she lost her mother. And if there was some sort of magic involved in her mother's death, she wants answers. In order to get those answers, though, Bree needs to be admitted into the secret society of the Legendborn, a group of descendants of the Knights of the Round Table and those sworn to protect them in their cause. Essentially, Bree has to compete in a set of trials if she wants a chance of being let into the group, and at the same time she has to navigate her own developing power while uncovering the society's secrets and cozying up to King Arthur's descendant himself. There is a romantic subplot in this one, and it just so happens to be a love triangle, and I usually really dislike love triangles, but I actually didn't mind this one because I feel like there's a lot going on and the two potential love interests are complete opposites. I did enjoy book 2, Bloodmarked, a little bit more because it was everything I liked about Legendborn, but bigger and better. I love the relationships between our main group of characters, and I also enjoyed seeing them challenged in a way that they hadn't been before. I don't think you really have to have a pre-existing interest in King Arthur and the Round Table to enjoy this story, but if you have an interest in Welsh and Arthurian legend and like indulging in young adult fantasy, then I think this could be a good fit for you. Finally, we have A Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, and this is a novella that is quick, simple, and comforting. It's about a tea monk named Sibling Dex who is feeling a little bit lost. They don't know what they're looking for, but they know they want to experience something new. So Dex sets out on an adventure and ends up running into a robot who is seeking out humans in search of an answer to the very philosophical question, what do people need? This is a sci-fi story, and in this world, robots used to be tools used by humans, and once the robots gained consciousness for themselves, they became free, and now the robots and humans live completely separate lives, never really interacting with one another. Despite that, Mosscap joins sibling Dex on their journey as they ponder their identity and purpose, and the robot is able to offer some advice to its new friend as it begins to learn more about humankind and our complicated emotions. I loved Mosscap, and I was able to relate to some of Dex's thoughts and fears, and I think this would make a great read when you need a reminder that you are doing just fine and that this life is meant to be enjoyed. Okay, so now I'm going to list off some other books that could have easily been included with the titles I just mentioned. They're still favorites from 2024, but I just didn't want this video to be too long, so I'm not going to be discussing them at length like the others. Babel by R.F. Kuang, A Girl Called Samson by Amy Harmon, The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali, Elements of Cadence Duology by Rebecca Ross, The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young, The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams, and Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm wishing you a happy and healthy holiday season, whatever you celebrate. I'm looking forward to taking some time to spend with my loved ones and relaxing and hopefully reading a few good books. I can't wait to share some reviews with you in the new year, and maybe I'll see you then. Bye!